Okay, this is part two of how business transformation can fix motivation in your organization. And in part one, it basically was about executives showing up uh, at the front line where customers interact with your organization. And from that, you get better data, you get better understanding of how the entire system works, you get better understanding of the customer, you get better understanding of, or even finding really, disconnects between the front line and the rest of the organization. And you establish really a direct link or communication between the front line and executives. And I can't emphasize enough how important that is. Um, you know, there's a view of, a certain hierarchy within organizations where, the front line, when they get on an elevator with an executive, is supposed to put their head down and not have any conversation with an executive because, they're the important people. Well, it's actually the other way around because customers really don't care about executives. What they do care about are the frontline people that are doing the work on a daily basis. So, as we get into part two here, this is about uh, that you need to, as an executive, trust the people in the system for business transformation. Now, I'm going to qualify who those people are because becomes a misnomer quite often in organizations about who should be designing the new system. Should it be an executive? Should it be IT? Should it be a project manager? And all of those are really bad answers. And I'll explain here in a minute. But to design a new system is going to require the people on the front line that interact with customers putting it together and using prototypes to figure out what works and what does not work. And they being the frontline customer facing group of people, need to have that interaction between the executive because when they run into a problem, trying to do something different that the organization doesn't allow, then they need to have the executives. The executives need to have their back, basically. Um, so the people who are designing the system I mentioned are exclusively the customer facing frontline people in the organization. No IT, in or outside of the organization. And I know this is going to fly in the face of everything that goes on. I've worked on PeopleSoft when it was around, and SAP, and all of these different systems that come in. All these outside advisors are going to make your system better. They're not. The people on the front line that are going to use the system need to be the ones engaged in designing what that system needs to look like, and not vice versa. In other words, IT telling what the front line, oh, you're going to love this, and and you want to see motivation go down quickly. That does it immediately. Anytime it could be a process improvement person, or accounting or training, or a project manager, people who really don't understand the work at all, uh, try to impose their will on the front line. That is where problems begin and motivation goes away and the gnashing of teeth begins. Um, so it establishes, and the reason this becomes important is because it establishes, by virtue of where the executives are spending their time and what they're doing, where value is created in the organization. It's not in that hierarchy. It's not in IT. It's not in training. It's not in project managers, and not from outside consultants coming in and telling them what to do. It's the people that do the work that create value for customers. And when execs say that's what's important. It becomes very clear to the rest of the organization, uh, you know, where that value is created with customers, which is the front line. Um, so a, a system designed by those who use it gets you a whole series of things. It gets you an understanding about compliance around things because they did it. You know, I'm not going to be compliant with that when it comes from outside, but when you come up with it and you know what the need is for it, then you get the compliance because you have the people that have to use it on a daily basis being the ones that are coming up with the ideas and designing the system. You get greater understanding. You as an executive will learn, but you also will get understanding that you couldn't get by virtue of a report that you get on your desk on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. You just don't get that interaction that you have, and you're establishing then, as I mentioned earlier, you're establishing that communication link between the frontline executive, which is crucial and can help mitigate a whole slew of things that people and organizations waste time on strategy, waiting for, what are customers interested now, because you'll know. And you can build it in and design it into your system. So you get this design component also. When you have people that do the work, then you're upping their game, and you're also getting them to do larger things in the organization, like strategy, like the measures, like things of that sort. They're thinking and not just interacting with customers. And now you get in essence, you get someone with a synthetic thinking, a systems thinking person on the front line that can make complex decisions based on what they've learned, as opposed to waiting for the next dictate or rule or policy or whatever. You work off a principle as opposed to those types of things. And so development of those principles become very important. So how do we establish what some of those are? Well, this is where you go in and you study, starting with the executives. I typically do in my executive education program. You study the organization customer in, working with the people on the front line, getting a good understanding of what's happening, not so that you can impose your will and your thoughts and your ideas on the front line, but to get an understanding of how the existing system works before you make changes to that system. Otherwise, what you wind up with in organizations, without a customer in understanding, are violent disagreements on what the customer thinks or wants, among executives. And, you get these because you don't have knowledge. Everybody thinks they have knowledge, but they haven't studied the organization. They haven't listened to customers, on the phone, or observed what happens when a technician goes out, to put in a new cable line, at a customer's house, or their place of business. So what you wind up with is, without some type of touchstone, without some type of shared aim about what's important to customers, then what you have is just a lot of people arguing over what they think, what opinion they have, as opposed to having seen and understood what's going on with customers. And then by studying customer in, I developed something in my system called a customer creed, which are all those things that are important to the customer that you need to do in order to serve them. And they will change over time, and that's why you need to engage the people on the front line designing the new system, so that they can make the changes as the changes happen, as opposed to waiting for the next dictate in the form of a rule or a policy or God knows what else. So those are things, all of these things will motivate people in your organization, especially when you get clarity around what's important to the customer. It establishes a shared aim. It establishes what's important to the organization as far as who's creating the value for customers. And that's the people on the front line, if you haven't guessed yet. The people who are customer facing. And these people on the front line being able to design their own system, you're going to get all of these things where it's going to be the place to be, as opposed to some ancillary area in the organization. Everybody understands that the customer really and the customer development of the customer creed becomes something everybody understands and knows in the organization, and clarity creates motivation in your organization too, because they understand what's important rather than themselves or something else, developing these things from a customer standpoint. Now, there's other things that you can do within your organization to help motivate things, as I found. One of them is having, innovation as a proactive activity in your company. In other words, people working on new services, new products, on a constant basis. It's not just something that, oh, well, maybe something will just come along, but being proactive about it, that's motivating also. And you could build that in essence with a different team of people, but having the people on the front line design it is so crucial. And you do it with a subset of a team of people while keeping everyone else at bay, but also giving them something to do to help them understand how the system's put together. And there's a whole series of things in my executive education program and the business transformation component that I've been building. It really is, they're so similar. I mean, there's really no difference. For me, when I'm doing executive education, it's a short trip to doing business transformation and making the changes that you need to in the organization. So even though I'm building it different, there's only slight differences between the two. So if you're interested in that, there's a training download that I have. It's $1,500 for, in essence, just to kind of get you started to see if this makes sense for your organization. You can do it on your own. I provide some phone support if you want it. I don't have to. If you want to try it on your own, that's awesome. Go for it. And, as I've mentioned in past episodes, the only thing I do is make it go faster. And depending on the organization and, the size of it and a number of other things, I make it go a lot faster. But that is what I wanted to cover as far as part 2. So the first part was about showing up as an executive. The second part's really about trusting the people in the system to design it. And then you get a bunch of motivating factors that I've talked about during the course of this episode. So that's what I wanted to cover this week. And remember, there is always a better way.